Now, this story of the prodigal son is one of the most famous, most well-known, and most loved parables that Jesus ever told. And it's easy to understand why many people who may be thinking about Christianity or may have become Christians later in their lives identify so strongly with this wayward son. Their circumstances and ambitions in life have unraveled, which nudge them toward God. And that is a really good reason to love this parable. It is a good reason to love the parable. No matter how deeply you have sunk, God, the gracious Father, will welcome all who come to Him. It is a good reason to love the parable. No matter how deeply you have sunk, God, the gracious Father, will welcome all who come to Him. But there is more to this parable, isn't there? It's not only a story about a wayward son finding his way back to a gracious father. It is also the story of another son who was furious over the graciousness of his father. It's not only a wayward son coming back, it is another son who is furious at the graciousness of his father. So we have two sons, and both tell us something very important about God the Father. These two sons tell us about God the Father. Now, firstly, why is this parable here? Why is Jesus telling this story now? You may remember the Pharisees became highly suspicious of Jesus, suggesting that perhaps Jesus wasn't taking religion as seriously as they were, that he was not taking holiness as seriously as they were. Why? Because they saw Jesus welcoming and engaging sinners with his message of God's kingdom. In their minds, receiving sinners and eating with them smacked of religious compromise. Jesus is seen to be eating with sinners and receiving them, and the Pharisees read that situation and they think, here is a compromiser. Here is a Jesus person, and he is compromised. So Jesus is working hard to give them an explanation for his actions, why he does what he does. And he did so through three parables. He tells them three parables, the parable of the lost sheep and the parable of the lost coin. Jesus explained that he was seeking out lost sinners because seeking lost sinners is exactly the kind of thing that God does. As Ezekiel well said, that God himself will search for his sheep and will seek them out. That is his heart toward sinners. This is who God is. His heart is to seek out sinners. But in this third parable, Jesus takes things much further. It's not only that God seeks out sinners, which the Pharisees incidentally failed to do, but it's also that the Pharisees, by their hostility towards sinners, fail to understand the graciousness of God towards sinners. In other words, their whole paradigm of religion, the whole paradigm that the Pharisees were working with, needed to be rechecked. They needed to think again about what sin is and who God is and how to relate to God. The whole thing needs a reboot. So let me propose that we work through this parable in 3 steps. Let's take a look at the prodigal son, then the welcoming father, and lastly, the sulking brother. And let's see if we can detect the ways in which God is helping the Pharisaical heart rethink what it means to relate to God. The prodigal son exposes a whole raft of problems to us. There's a whole raft of problems that we have to get our heads around first to understand what's going on. For starters, the prodigal son demanded from his father, "Give me the share of property that is coming to me." And so the father divided his property between them. On the surface, this is a son demanding his inheritance. But the problem is, he is demanding his inheritance while his father is still alive. That is so offensive, even in our culture, isn't it? You imagine a child saying to his parents, "Give me my inheritance now, before you are dead." And it's even more offensive in the ancient Middle Eastern cultures. Commentators tell us that a son who asked for his inheritance while his father is still alive was as good as wishing his father dead. It is a total rejection of the father. It is as if to say, "You are as good as dead to me. That's how I think about you. You are as good as dead to me. So hand over my part of the inheritance so I can get on with my life." More than this, the text tells us that the father complies. The text says that he divided his property between them. And this too is highly problematic. In ancient Middle Eastern culture, your identity, your reputation, and your standing in a community was tied much to your wealth and your land ownership. Who you are as a person mattered and was counted by the measure of your wealth and land ownership. The more land you had, the greater your status. But in order to comply with this son's demand, the father has to liquidate his assets. He has to carve off and sell a portion of his land, which meant losing some of his reputation and standing in the community along with it. So not only was this son wishing his father dead, the son was also striking at his father's reputation and standing in the community on his way out. In more ways than one, this son was truly breaking his father's heart. And then he leaves, blowing that inheritance, his father's wealth, on parties and prostitutes. And then he finds himself at the crossroads, doesn't he? The lifestyle is gone. He's bankrupt. He has no job. And so he sold himself into servitude on a pig farm. Now, remember, Jesus is telling this story to Pharisees, and when they were listening to Jesus telling this story, they would have immediately grinned with some satisfaction at this point. Sinners, like the prodigal son, working on a pig farm, an animal off limits in their religion, was exactly the kind of punishment that sinners deserve. End of story. But Jesus goes on. That is not the point of his story. Jesus goes on. The prodigal son starts to think about how well his father treated his servants. Not just his family, but how well his father treated hired servants. And the son gets thinking, maybe I could grovel my way back to Dad's farm. And even if my father never treated me like a son ever again, maybe as one of his servants, I would be better off than this muck and stench and destitution of working with pigs. Even if Dad never calls me son again, even if I was just a worker, an employee, my life would be better than what I've got it as I have it right now. And so the son makes this plan. Father, he's going to go back to Father and he's going to say, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants. It's interesting there, isn't it, that the prodigal has by this time accepted that his status as a son in his father's household is too high an honor for him to ever regain. He's blown it, and he's accepted his fate. He said, look, I'm no longer worthy to be called a son. I accept that. I accept. After all, he has rejected his father. He has insulted his father. He has shamed his father. He has dishonored his father. He has broken his father's heart. So he couldn't simply ask to be reinstated as a son. But he was willing to work his way back into his father's favor and gracious care. He was willing to work his way back. And that's quite a natural way to think about reconciliation, isn't it? If we offend against someone, if we sin against someone, we come clean, we confess our sin, and then we offer some kind of restitution. We offer to work extra hard to show how sorry we are. We go out of our way to express the sincerity of our confession in the hope that that relationship could somehow be salvaged or mended, right? We go out of our way to show how sorry we are. We are quite happy to think about reconciliation in terms of working our way back into someone's favor and care. And this is exactly what the prodigal son hopes will do the trick. Grovel, work hard in the hope of softening his father's heart. Which brings us to point number 2, the welcoming father. As the prodigal son returns, resigned to be nothing more than a servant and to work hard to earn his father's favor, we find, while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion and ran and embraced him and kissed him. It's such a touching image, isn't it? It's such a touching image to imagine that scenario play out. But to the Pharisees listening to Jesus telling this story, this would have been outrageous. This would have been utterly outrageous. Why? Because in ancient Middle Eastern culture, fathers do not run to meet anybody. They just don't run. It is undignified behavior. You don't run. According to one of the best New Testament scholars, Darrell Bock, he says normally a father waits to be addressed by the son and to receive some indication of respect before responding. That's normal. But here, the father is so full of joy that he drapes himself around his son's neck and welcomes him back with hugs and kisses of affection. The Pharisees would have understood this father's behavior to be highly undignified. Highly undignified. It's embarrassing. Fathers don't run. It's embarrassing. It's beneath his status to be so giddy with love for a son who has been so disrespectful and has now returned to seek his favor. It is beneath the father to behave so giddy with love over a son like that. But remember, this is not the first time that Jesus had to remind the Pharisees of the happiness of God when sinners return to him, of the joyfulness of the Father when sinners return. In the two previous parables, the lost sheep and the lost coin, Jesus said there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents and over 99 righteous persons who need no repentance. And then he went on to say there is joy before the angels of God over one sinner who repents. Joy, joy, and more joy when the sinners return to God. And so in this parable, Jesus is yet again illustrating that such overwhelming joy and love, what that looks like in the heavenly realms when sinners come home to God. When sinners repent and turn back to God, Jesus said they will find him like a father who does not hesitate to throw off all sense of decorum, running to welcome them home. That's what you will find God like. When sinners go back to God, they will find him like this. But what then about the son's plan to grovel? He spent a long time making that plan, so what about this plan to work and earn back his father's favor and care, to make up for all his wrongdoing? Sure enough, verse 21 shows him trying to implement this plan. He has the plan and he wants to action it. Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. And that's as far as he gets. The father cuts him off mid-thought. The father doesn't want to hear about his son's plan to make things up to him. He's not even willing to entertain his son's request for employment. Instead, what the father did, to everyone's surprise, is this. The father said to his servants, "Bring quickly the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet. And bring the fattened calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate." This is vivid grace. This is what it's meant to convey. This is grace, and it is vivid grace. The son was right. He had sinned against the father. He really wasn't worthy to be called a son any longer. But the father is gracious, exceedingly gracious, exceptionally gracious. The son had been in the muck of a pig farm. It had been a long walk. He probably stinks. He's dirty. And then his father puts his best coat on the son. Not after he's had a bath, while he's still smelly. Have the best coat. And then he honors him with a ring. And he dresses his feet. And he puts on this crazy expensive feast for him. It is grace upon grace, unearned and completely unearnable. It is grace upon grace. And this is a true picture of salvation. You can't bargain your way back to God. You can't earn your way back to God. And not even your best intentions to warrant God's favor and care will be accepted. Meaning the fatherly welcome of God is all grace. It is all grace. It is grace from top to bottom, from front to back, from side to side, which is what the prodigal son realizes through experience. His welcome back into the household of his father is all grace from an exceptionally gracious Father. The Pharisees, however, do not accept that this is what God is like. They do not accept that God is exceptionally gracious. Which brings us to point number 3. The sulky older brother who represents the Pharisees. In Jesus' parable, the older brother knew the younger brother disrespected the father. He's heard the stories. He heard what his younger brother did to dad. How the younger brother wished him dead, took his inheritance, and shamed him in the community. So when he discovered this younger brother was back, and his father was immeasurably gracious in welcoming him, he's furious. He is furious. Look at verses 27 to 28. A servant said to this older brother, "Your younger brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened calf, because he has received him back safe and sound." But he, the older brother, was angry and refused to go in. And you can understand why, can't you? This brat of a brother comes back, and dad is so happy that he throws him a party. I mean, come on, where's the fairness in that? A party that's probably being paid for out of his own future inheritance, right? Someone has to pay, and it's coming out of the pot that could belong to him if dad passes away. Of course the older brother is mad. That brat of a brother deserves nothing. Back in 1981, there was the infamous underarm bowling incident in a cricket match between the Aussies and the Kiwis. On the final ball of the final over, the Kiwis needed 6 runs to get a draw. So Trevor Chappell bowled underarm along the ground, which no batter could strike for runs. Years later, Warren Lees said in an interview that after the match, there had been a long silence in the New Zealand dressing room, which was broken suddenly and unexpectedly by fellow player Mark Burgess, throwing and smashing a teacup against the wall. That summed up how we were all feeling. Too angry for words. We felt we have been cheated. We were livid. This is what the older brother is feeling. He felt absolutely cheated and too angry for words. Why should his brother get away with this wrongdoing? Why should he be given a second chance? Why should he be celebrated with such love and acceptance by his father? He's done nothing to earn it. He's done absolutely nothing to warrant it. In contrast, the sulking brother makes it clear. Look, he said to his father, probably so angry he can't even bring himself to address his father as father. Just look, look. These many years I have served you. I have never disobeyed your command. Yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. It seems so unfair to the older brother. He's played by the rules. He's done everything that he thought the father required. He's kept out of trouble. He didn't go off the rails like the younger brother. So where is his party? Why is he not being celebrated like a prince? And this is the vital point of the whole parable which the Pharisees and those who believe like them must come to understand. By sulking, that their father was being too gracious, by their sulking and that attitude, they are doing exactly what the older brother was doing. Sulking because they believe the father is too gracious. See, the older brother would chastise the younger brother and say, you only deserve to be in the Father's good books if you've done as I have done. Serve the Father diligently for many years. Never disobey His commands. And then you can have the celebration and salvation that is your due. The older brother would speak to the younger brother that way, surely. I've done everything right, do as I do, and then you can have your celebration and salvation. But Jesus says this is fundamentally a wrong way to think about God. This is fundamentally wrong to think about God this way. To think that serving and obeying is what earns you a portion of His graciousness. This is wrong, and Jesus shows it to be wrong. The Father is gracious to the returning Son, not because that Son served and obeyed, but because by coming back to the Father, He's coming back into the Father's heart and His affections. I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious. Why? Because He is a gracious God. That's simply who He is, unearned and unearnable. It is who He is. And the older son is offered the same grace. He's not going to miss out. God will be gracious to him also. Look at verse 31. He said to him, Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. Meaning for all your protesting and confidence and serving me and obeying me to solicit my favor has always been yours. It's always been there for you. All that is mine is yours. And the only reason you'll miss out on the festivity and the celebration, on salvation itself, is if you continue believing that my graciousness is or could be merited, could be earned in some way, could be worked for or served for. That's the only reason that you're going to miss out, why you're going to be on the outside of the banquet rather than in the banquet. Is if you believe as you do now that grace is earned, not freely given. Which simply leaves us asking, what now? The parable ends there. There's no resolution for the older brother. The younger brother repents and he's received and welcomed back in celebratory love to his father, having learnt something about his father's grace and love. But the older brother repents not and is left standing where he is, unwilling to participate in the graciously given festivities. And so we have to ask in our own hearts, what do we really believe about accessing the Father's love and favor? What do we really believe? Are we like the older brother, serving and obeying to earn something from the Father? Or are we seeing ourselves more like the younger brother, who in repentance found the Father to be far more gracious than he ever dared to imagine?